On this Monday morning, it's now been 2 weeks since the Turkey-Syria earthquake. Tens of thousands of people dead as a result of it. Rescue efforts have come to an end in all but 2 provinces in Turkey as hopes of finding anyone else alive fade.
Well, neither Turkey nor Syria have said how many people are still unaccounted for, with thousands of survivors being left homeless in near-freezing winter conditions as the death toll is expected to climb.
Joining us now in the studio, a very interesting man called Noel McDermott. Noel is a psychotherapist. And Noel, that means you're an expert on trauma and something called survivor's guilt. We would have thought, how amazing, you've come through this, you've survived after 7 days, 8 days, 9, 10 days, whatever. But yet a lot of people, it's not as simple as that.
No. I mean, the term came about from the Holocaust, oddly enough. And it's come to explain how complicated survival is when people that you love and care about don't survive, and where you weren't able to help them and bring them with you because, of course, we are the sum total of the people that we love in our lives. And when they get left behind in traumatic circumstances, it's very difficult as a human being, I think we can all empathise with this, to celebrate one's own survival in the face of that.
And of course, survivor's guilt will be just one of the many traumas these people will be suffering. The huge shock of the fear, you know, the fear of seeing buildings collapse around you, the shock of seeing dead bodies, the shock of losing your possessions, not knowing what the future holds. I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about what people are having to contend with at the moment.
I think we take for granted, and we should take for granted, this thing called psychological safety. We have this internalised sense of a safe space inside us, and that gives us resilience to deal with things. But that only comes because we have all these everyday connections, our local shop, our family, our routines every day. When all of those are taken away in a traumatic and violent manner, that sense of safety is lost. And when we lose that sense of safety, we live in a very disturbed state. And then on top of that is the actual threats and risks. So whilst we put in place services for people, they still have this deep sense of being in an unsafe place.
Noel, the whole place must be unsafe, the whole infrastructure totally gone, shattered. We talk about tens of thousands of people who have died. How many people have survived and are traumatised as a result of this, and they've got no systems? It's not as if they can make an appointment with someone like you or whatever. I mean, people like you are going to be very few on the ground, I would have thought.
And I think we would be inappropriate at this point. I think at this point it's the basic stuff. What we need to provide people with is empower their capacity to start looking after themselves on a very basic level. So for children, for example, it's really important we get schools up and running, even if that's in a tent, it doesn't matter. We know that that helps them, that they get back to some sense of routine and normality. For parents, some sense, even if it's in a tent, some sense in which this is now my home, I'm going to organise it, I'm going to make sure we've got food, somewhere to sleep, etc. Those things are really what people need at the moment.
But for the people who don't have homes, for the people who don't have health mentally or physically, who don't have money in their bank account, who can't access, I mean, it's just unbelievable that everything they know and trust and everything they take as normal is gone.
Yes, and it's going to take a very long time to recover psychologically. A very, very long time, and it's going to be a slow process. And we need to know that and remember it and understand it, that this is something that's going to take generations for people to heal from. And we need to be available sort of as a nation to understand that and help people.
And we have a big Turkish community, don't we, in the UK. Lots of Turkish people will be feeling also huge amounts of survivors' guilt, concern and trauma from the way that they've lost loved ones and their family homes, perhaps where they grew up and everything that they knew.
I was talking to a guy in one of my local restaurants where I live in London. He's a Turkish guy, strong Turkish community where I am. Wonderful people who brought a lot of new business to the area, etc. And I was just being polite and saying, how are you? How are things? Have you lost family? 10 people.
No.
10 members of his family.
10 in the family circle, that's incredible.
Absolutely. All close members, not distant, but very close people to him. And he's here in the UK, feeling impotent and powerless, and how does he help? Very kind very kind gentleman like a lot of the community.
Yeah. But even you talk about community there, people who have no alternative, that is their life, that is their neighbourhood, that is where they live. I mean, do you go back to that? I mean, you must live in fear that it will happen again.
We're remarkably resilient as human beings. Our greatest survival strategy is our community. You might call it the herd, for example. And we tend to want to get back together. And you see, one of the things that you see, the remarkable things that you see on the images at the moment are people banding together and helping each other out. As soon as you get to that, you've got some hope that people are going to survive because they've remembered what makes us really strong, which is our connections to other people and our love relationships. Those are things that get us through these things.
You've identified the problem, and you know what the solution is, but the solution isn't resourced. I mean, it must be quite hopeless. I mean, you've identified, you said, this is what will be wrong with these people.
Yeah.
It's not going to be fixed, though, is it?
I think it's an understandable response, and it maybe highlights some of the things that, as an observer, we're also experiencing this trauma. And so we're watching it, particularly in your profession, for example. I'm really concerned about your colleagues on the ground and the impact upon them, because everybody is going to be equally traumatised by this thing. There's a thing called secondary traumatisation, which comes from witnessing. So we have that in terms of our first responders. It's well known, our ambulance workers, our firefighters have these traumatic responses. And the potential is that we have that and have a sense of overwhelm and hopelessness from it. It's really important we don't give in to that.
Do you know, there's a lot of news stories we could apply that to, and one of them is Nicola Bulley. If it turns out that is her body, if that turns out to be confirmed, so many people will, from a secondary point of view, take the worries of her family, and they will take her loss if it turns out that she has died, and personally.
Yes, and it's a sign of, in a strange way, it's a sign of healthy psychological functioning. Our capacity to empathise with others is fundamentally important as social animals. That's what we are. The capacity to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and feel what it might be like. And that desire from that to take action and help is a fundamentally wonderful thing that we do as human beings, and something to be celebrated. But right now, as a country, we've been through many existential crises over the last few years, and it's piling on top of each other is what it feels like, you know?
It is.
So we've had, all the way through, I would say we had the existential crisis of the nation being almost at war around Brexit, and then you just follow that through. Every single thing.